At the beginning of the 70s, the NBA was in flux, struggling for national footing with its sister league, the ABA. Dr. J would at times hold the role of lead meal ticket for both leagues, and in 1980, he would pass that torch to one of the two men who would unwittingly revolutionize the league, transforming it into the powerhouse we know today. In 1979, the Los Angeles Lakers would draft one of those men, and in 1980, he would have an NBA Finals series that would go down as a defining moment in a Hall of Fame career. This is the NBA in Hindsight, and tonight we remember the 1980 champion Los Angeles Lakers. Welcome to the NBA in Hindsight, where we look back on every champion in the history of the NBA. Today, we are looking back at the 1980 Los Angeles Lakers, which would start off a revolution of a decade that would put the NBA into the limelight, thanks mostly to two men. But we'll obviously get into talking about those two a lot during this podcast. My name is Jeff Blagden.
And I'm Xavier Barnett.
Welcome to the Pure Point Project. So we are talking, of course, about Mr. Magic Johnson and Mr. Larry Bird, who both came into the league at the same time under very, very different circumstances, one much more controversial than the other one, but both entering the league at the same time, one taking home Rookie of the Year, the other taking home Finals MVP that year.
Yeah, it's we're talking about the should I just say their names outright? Well, obviously if you pay attention to the NBA, you know who they are.
Well, it's yeah, like I did say Magic Johnson and Larry Bird. But yeah, they're obviously the 80s are their decade.
Yeah, it's kind of sparks the rivalry of the Celtics and the Lakers, you know. I remember when I watched the finals in the Celtics won in 08, that finals, they just kept talking about how the rivalry was revived. So now you know where the rivalry is from the Magic Johnson and Larry Bird. But I'm gonna get a little ahead of myself. This is the 80s, so this is a little bit the birth about the Magic Johnson. We'll get to that soon.
I mean,
because it's in the 80s.
I mean, the Lakers Celtics has always been the rivalry in basketball, right? Like, it was Wilt Chamberlain and Bill Russell, and then it was obviously Magic Johnson and Larry Bird, and then obviously we get into the Kobe and Paul Pierce and that era. When KG comes over and Pau Gasol goes over to the Lakers, we have that era of the Lakers. And hell, we may even be on our way to another one now with the Lakers looking prominent right now. And, of course, Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown and company over in Boston looking like they're assembling a contending team as well. So, I mean, it's just one constant that's always there in the NBA. The Celtics and Lakers are going to be good at some point during a decade.
Yeah, I'm going to steal a line. But the NBA is just so much better to watch when the Lakers and the Celtics are good. I'm just going to say that line right now.
That's like the tagline that everyone throws in to talk about the Knicks, about why the league wants the Knicks to be good all the time. They're like, the league is better when the Knicks are good. The Knicks haven't been good since 1974. What are you talking about?
That's so true.
But it is worth noting that through the entire decade of the 1980s, there was not a single NBA Finals that didn't feature either the Celtics or the Lakers, and 3 times they were both in it.
Yeah, it's a great time. It's a great time to be. So as you can tell, for this decade, we're going to probably be focused on the Celtics and the Lakers. But you know, there's a couple of other teams in the '80s that kind of snuck in a little bit. You know,
just a few.
But yeah, their time will come. Yeah, it's just a great time introduction to the season, right? I believe this is the year the 3-point line was introduced as well, 79-80.
Indeed, the first year of the 3-point line in the NBA.
Yeah, the basketball court started to look more like a basketball court that I kind of recognize now.
Also, I don't know if you noticed, but there seemed to be a significant jump in camera quality from 78-79 to 79-80.
Yeah, I think I've noticed that. Maybe those games got remastered. I'm assuming
the NBA could finally afford good cameras,
or that too.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think. I think you would think that they would remaster all of them if they were gonna post them in, because I've been using the same kind of the same YouTube page to view all of these games. So you would think if they would remaster one, they'd remaster them all if they were capable of it, right?
That is true. I also want to check. Did yours have ads? There's still ads still or no?
I didn't watch the ones with ads this time.
Yeah, mine
Um,
didn't have ads either. It's just straight game. No halftime show, no nothing.
the ones I was watching this time though too were like flashback things, like it was like the games. It was the 1980 NBA championship, but I guess I was watching a recording of a re-air from like the 90s because
Uh,
every now and then like stats would come across the bottom that would be like Julius Erving was a 16-time All-Star, and I'm like, this is 1980. Like, what are you talking about?
yeah, definitely a re-recorded then. Unless they could see the future like The Simpsons. But
Yeah, Julius Erving is going to be a 16-time All-Star. Trust me.
just look at this
That
guy.
wouldn't quell the people that think the NBA is rigged.
For sure. Oh
Um,
man.
but yeah, the two guys that would obviously become the focal points of the NBA, much to the chagrin of Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who is still out there winning MVP every year.
Yeah.
But Larry Bird and Magic Johnson, of course. Larry Bird drafted in the 1978 draft with the 6th overall pick, but decided to go back to Indiana. This was before that was even possible, right? The rules now don't let you enter the draft, declare your eligibility, and then go back and play basketball, right?
Hmm.
But what had happened was Bird entered the draft in 78, right? Was drafted 6th overall by the Celtics, decided to go back to Indiana to win them a championship, which he did do that next year, beat Magic to win it. But wins the championship that year, then comes over to the Celtics. But there was sort of this controversy where even though he was coming out of college, because of the position that the NBA was in that, right, Larry Bird was arguably going to be the best player in the league as soon as he came into the NBA, right? So when he was drafted 6th overall, people kind of knew. They kind of had the idea that he was thinking about going back and playing college basketball, and that's why he wasn't drafted number one, right? Even though he was the best player coming out of the draft.
That's
Um,
crazy.
but so there was this contention where the Celtics didn't want to make him the highest paid player in basketball, right? They didn't back in 1980. They didn't have set rookie contracts, right? So
Mhm.
the Celtics didn't want to make a rookie paid higher than the rest of their team, right? So they didn't want to pay him that contract. So there was the contention. He went back to Indiana. The Celtics almost let him slip by again, let him slip out of their grips because he was going to be drafted number one overall in 1979, right? In the 1979 draft, right? Um, because he was threatening to declare again if they didn't give him the contract he wanted, and then finally the Celtics caved and gave him the contract and signed him, and the rest is history. He played his entire career with the Celtics, and 3 championships, 3-time MVP, etc., etc. Right? But there was at first it was hit or miss on whether he was going to actually even end up with the Celtics.
Wow, that's crazy. You never know. It's kind of like similar to like the Kobe situation, when he first got introduced to the league. Well, not similar, but it's crazy that a rookie could have that much power over a franchise, right? You haven't even obviously you think he's gonna be the best, but they haven't even seen if he's gonna like really pan out or not, right? Like, could you imagine paying a player that much money and then?
Think about it this way, right? When LeBron came into the 2004 draft, right? For years, a decade almost beforehand, right? Since he was like 14 years old, people were proclaiming him to be the savior, right? The next star in the NBA, the next Michael Jordan, right? So the only reason that LeBron didn't become immediately the highest paid player in the NBA was because there was restrictions on what you could pay a rookie at the time, right? There was rookie contracts that you had to pay the first overall pick a certain amount of money, et cetera, right? But in 1980, there was no rule for that, right? So they and he had the leverage of being able to say, I'm going to re-enter the draft the next year, right?
Mhm.
So you combine that leverage with that, and you think about it. If LeBron said to the Cavs when he was coming into the league, you know what, screw it, I'm going to go play college ball for a year and enter the draft again next year, right? That's the type of leverage we're talking about, right? And
Oh, you could do that?
well, he could have for sure, right? Like
Whoa, I didn't even.
there was no reason that LeBron had to come out of high school, right? Aside from he wanted to be in the NBA sooner, right? He could have very easily gone to Ohio State, right? Played a year there and then entered the draft after that, right? But obviously Cleveland, his hometown team, had the number one overall pick, so he was gonna come out, right?
Mhm.
But you got to think at the time he could have very easily demanded to be the highest paid player in basketball, right? Aside from
Yeah.
maybe Shaq, right? Like who else? Right when LeBron came into the league, he was the number one meal ticket, right? Like he was the highest in terms of drawing fans to the stadium. That he was the biggest draw in the NBA as soon as he came into the league, right? So he could have very easily done the same thing, and it's the same situation pretty much with Bird, aside from the fact that the same draft class had Magic Johnson in it the next year.
Oh, it's good. Sorry, my computer just went black for a second, so that's why I didn't say anything. But it's good. It's good now. But
Well, I'm glad it's
yeah,
back.
yeah. I was just like, did my computer just die or something? That's what I thought, but it was just my screen, because I wasn't moving my mouse around too much. But you guys don't care about that. So, but yeah, it's that's crazy. I didn't know players could technically like. I guess because they didn't sign the contract yet, so even if they were picked in the draft, would that be considered a wasted pick then if they like
Yeah, they would have just
go to
lost
a
it.
redraft?
Yeah, they would have just
Wow,
lost it.
that's insane. I didn't even. So that's why when like some players they get drafted by a team, they can just refuse to sign the contract and then
Well,
just go
realistically,
to
any
this draft.
player can do that, right? The problem is, with the way the rules are now, if you declared for the draft in 2020 and then you got drafted number one overall and you didn't want to sign with that team, sure, you don't have to sign that contract, but you can't then go back and play college basketball, right? Once you've declared for the draft, that's it. Your eligibility in college is done, right? So you'd have to sit out the entire year and enter the draft again the next year, which there's nothing saying you can't do, or hell, go over to Europe and then come
That's what I
back.
was
Like
just
that's what
about to
Brandon
say.
Jennings did, right? He didn't want to play college ball, so Brandon Jennings went over to Europe and played professional ball, got paid for a year, and came back over to the NBA and got drafted, right?
Yeah,
So you can do a version of that today, but it's a lot more risky for a player today than it was back then.
yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, some players have been preferring Europe over going to play for college ball. But yeah, I didn't know all these. It really is a risk to consider taking draft picks, right? You can
It was
if
much
you're like
riskier
a
back then than it is now,
yeah,
that's for sure.
that's true. Like I wouldn't want to play for like the Knicks if I was a player.
Man, I'd love to
Sorry,
play
Knicks
for the
fans.
Knicks. I mean, aside from James Dolan, I'd love to play for the Knicks. Imagine being the star player on the Knicks. You know those endorsement deals, man. I mean,
The endorsement
as
deals would be
as
nice.
as terrible as the Knicks have been, they're still the most valuable franchise in basketball.
That's true, but I think the New York media is what's really bugs me. You know,
I'd
you
love
make
that.
a you make one little mistake.
I'd love to
Is
fuck
he
with the New
washed
York
up?
media all the time. Every interview, I'd just be messing with them, man.
Hey, fair enough. I'm like, oh my goodness, you know. That's why, like, I don't know if some people say some players don't want to, I don't know if this is true or not, but they don't want to play with LeBron because of all the media attention. I doubt it. I don't know if it's 100% true, but who
I
knows?
mean, different players are different people too, right? Like that's the thing. They're still human, right? So some people are shyer than other people, right? Some people don't want to be in that limelight or can't handle the pressure of playing for the Knicks or the Toronto Maple Leafs for that matter or something like that or the
Yeah.
Dallas Cowboys, right? Some players don't want that, right? But
Mhm.
it's going to be different from player to player.
That's true. It's a very fair point.
Of course, after Bird's draft year, the next year, he didn't re-enter the draft, did sign with the Celtics, and of course the number 1 overall pick ended up being Irvin Magic Johnson, who would become sort of, I mean, I want to say something we'd never seen before in the league, but realistically he was very similar to what Oscar Robertson was to the league, except different era with, more talent in that. He was a little bit less of a scorer and a little bit more of a facilitator.
Hmm.
But at the end of the day, kind of similar styles in what the two of them did. Both of them could rebound, score, and pass. The thing with Magic Johnson was he was 6'9" and was a point guard.
Insane. Yeah. It's like a cheat code. It's like when you go to 2K and you make a small forward and you make him 7 feet, or a shooting guard and make him 7 feet. This guy actually had the actual cheat code. So he's a 2K player pretty much.
Well, I mean,
but my player.
I mean, Kevin Durant is a 7-foot tall small forward. Does that mean Kevin Durant is a cheat code?
He is. Why do you think his shot's so nice, right? It's one of the most unguardable shots ever.
Fair enough. Fair enough, but Magic couldn't shoot, so.
Yeah, he was more effective in other areas.
He actually got better later in his career. He became a fairly, for the league of the time, a capable shooter near the tail end of his career.
Yeah, it's just seeing him, just seeing like some of his stats. That playoff series, he really did go off though.
Yeah, I mean, that whole season, right? Like, the thing with the Lakers is they had been dominant at the start of the 70s, right? Like, they won the championship in 72. They were in the finals in 73. But then in 75, Wilt Chamberlain retired. In 76, Jerry West retired, right? They got Kareem in 75 and then drafted Gail Goodrich. Well, no, Gail Goodrich was still there. They ended up trading Gail Goodrich in 76, which, I mean, they traded Gail Goodrich to the Utah Jazz for a future draft pick, which ended up being the number 1 pick in 1979, which ended up being Magic Johnson. So, a pretty good swap there, despite the fact that Gail Goodrich was a very good player. But it jumped them from this flux position of, yeah, Kareem is probably the best player in the league, but there's not really anything else around him, right? To now we're a contender again, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like 78-79, the Lakers finished 47-35, right? 79-80, 60-22. The only major addition was Magic Johnson.
Yeah, it's such a difference like some players can make, right? He just comes in and then they instantly get the number 1 seed. Last year I think they were the 2nd seed?
The year before?
Yeah, year before.
I don't remember off the top of my head. I know they
Let me just double
lost
check.
in the second round to the Sonics.
Oh, they were
there. They lost in 5 in the second round of the Sonics. I know that.
Oh, they were the 5th seed. So 47-35, right? So the 5th seed to number 1 seed. And just crushing teams too, like 4-1 victories. It's not even like, only the, 76ers took 2 games off of them, but like they crushed Phoenix and they also crushed the Supersonics, which was a big challenge for them that took them out in the second round. So they got their revenge and go on to win the year. So just one player takes it in and then really shows the advantage. Not many players can have. I don't even think there's much players that can. Hey, in my rookie year, I take my team to the finals and then I get the finals MVP. I was that valuable to my team in the final playoffs. Not a lot of players have a rookie year like that in their first year.
To be fair, not a lot of rookie players get drafted to a team with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar on it.
That's true. That is a fair statement as well.
So Magic's rookie season, he plays in 77 games, plays 36 minutes per game, puts up 18 points per game, 7.3 assists, 7.7 rebounds, 2.4 steals. Just kills it his rookie year. Of course, Larry Bird does end up edging him out for rookie of the year. He averages 21.3, 10.4 boards, and 4.5 assists per game. So, we have obviously two of the arguably top 5 players in NBA history coming into the league in the same year, right? So that's probably the toughest rookie of the year vote anyone has ever had to make.
Yeah, that's fair. I don't know.
I mean, maybe LeBron, Carmelo. I don't know, but I feel like Magic, Bird is that's got to be the toughest.
Yeah, no, for sure. It's kind of hard, and like there's only one difference in game. Maybe that was what put Larry Bird over the edge. The fact that they won 61 games and then LA only won 60.
The two things I think that really factored into it, and it's hard to say because there was a lot. The moment too plays into it a lot. The storylines and that kind of things too, right? Like when we look back, there's no arguing between you and me. I don't think either of us would argue that Derrick Rose deserved to win MVP when he won it that year, right? But we were alive and watched that season, right? Mm-hmm. Whereas if someone was looking back on it that wasn't alive or wasn't watching basketball at the time, they would probably look at it and be like, LeBron James should have been MVP, right?
Yeah, that's true.
But just looking at numbers and that, right? But they don't have the storyline to give it context that we do. A couple of things. The Lakers were probably a better team than the Celtics, right? So Bird was more important. We just spent so much time talking about how important Magic was, but Bird was probably more important to the Celtics at the time than Magic was to the Lakers. And I mean, that's not really a knock on Magic. He was playing alongside a 6-time MVP, right? So Bird's second best player on the team was probably a 31-year-old Dave Cowens, maybe Tiny Archibald, who was also 31, right? I mean, that team had a 32-year-old Pete Maravich in his last season in the league. It wasn't as good of a team as the Lakers team was. So Bird played a little bit more of a hand in them being as good as they did. He was also a little bit more of a scorer than Magic was. Both were kind of more facilitators than scorers. They were both kind of pass first guys in that, but Bird, I mean, we see it all the time, right? Even in the NBA today, the scorers get more love, right?
Yeah. No, for sure. And one thing I just also want to add too is the year before, the Celtics went from being almost second last in the entire conference to number 1. So
I mean, the Celtics with that 6th overall pick that they drafted Larry Bird with, that was their pick, right? So they were the 6th worst team in basketball that year, right? Whereas the pick that the Lakers used to draft Magic, that was traded from the Utah Jazz, right? So that was the Jazz's pick. So they weren't by default, they weren't as bad of a team starting off, right?
So that kind of makes sense, for Bird, just seeing the Celtics' previous season record and now they're the number 1 seed. So talk about impact, that's pretty impressive for a rookie.
Mm-hmm. Another big thing that happened in 1979 for the Lakers that would go down to, form the dynasty that would become the Lakers, not only in that decade, but for the rest of the Lakers franchise up to the date, is that at the end of the 1979 season, Jerry Buss purchased the Lakers, right? And the Buss family has owned the Lakers ever since. He hired Paul Westhead as head coach, right? But Paul Westhead got in a bicycle accident early in the season. So he was replaced by Jack McKinney with this kind of duo with Pat Riley, who was also kind of assistant coaching in that, and Jack McKinney, of course, went on to lead them to a 60 and 22 record, other way around. Jack McKinney was hired, got in a bicycle accident. Paul Westhead was hired to take over for Jack McKinney, leads them to a 50 and 18 record as head coach, and of course to an NBA Finals. So obviously, Jack McKinney's not coming back next year.
Yeah. for
McKinney. A fluke bicycle accident gets Paul Westhead most prestigious coaching job in the NBA.
Yeah, I mean he was assistant coach, him and Pat Riley, and then he kind of took it over. Well, Pat Riley has a very distinguished NBA career.
He likes to
Uh,
jump around between the front office and coaching.
right? Yeah, that's the shit. But good on him. Uh, another thing just sort of wanted to add is it's really kind of changes the whole season is oh my goodness, I forgot what I was saying. Never mind. This is damn embarrassing. It'll come back to me. You
It
go ahead,
happens.
Jess.
We'll get back to it later. Of course, as we're talking about the Lakers, yes, we're going to talk about Magic Johnson because in my mind he's the fourth best, maybe third best player in NBA history, right? So, but on that team as well was the guy who I would put in the other one that you don't put in the third or fourth spot with Magic, which would be Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who won MVP that season as well.
Yeah.
So another big part of that team, obviously. That MVP, of course, would be his. That MVP would be his fifth out of six, I believe. So actually, that was his last. That was his sixth MVP that he would win in the league. Averaged 24.6 points, over 10 rebounds per game, nearly 5 assists per game, and was, of course, probably the best defensive center in the league again that year as well. So I think we talk a lot about Magic on the team, and I feel like it might just be because we get tired of talking about Kareem so much.
Yeah, Kareem. I mean, just dominates straight from like when he first comes into the league, right? It's just it's you kind of get used to it. Kareem, and plus, especially in this, Kareem won MVP a couple of years before as well. Been carrying the Lakers, so it's kind of nice to have that Kareem kind of has like his, I guess his at this time now he becomes the Magic's the Robin and Kareem's the Batman, and then as time goes on, Magic becomes Batman and Kareem becomes the Robin. But
Yeah,
for now, Kareem's still dominating in this year.
I think some of it might just be the length of Kareem's career. People just got it was like, okay, yeah, we get it, right? The same reason LeBron doesn't win MVP every single year, right? Is because we know LeBron's the best player in basketball. We don't let's give someone else the MVP. Like nobody's arguing that LeBron's number one, right? Well, they're now, but for the longest stretch of his career, before he was, 35 years old, no one was arguing that. Speaking of which, Kareem 32 during that season, his 10th season in the league. Entered the league obviously with Milwaukee, won a championship there alongside Oscar Robertson, and go figure, the formula for him winning another championship was to put the most similar player to Oscar Robertson, aside from maybe LeBron James, in the history of the NBA alongside him.
Yeah, I guess that's what makes him thrive, right? This guy Kareem's pretty deadly, but like I said, teams were like, okay, so if you just stop Kareem and then no one else can really do anything, force him to pass the ball, and then
Watching these games again, it's like I've watched full, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar games before in the past and that, but it's been a while, right? Since I've watched a full Kareem Abdul-Jabbar game, and everybody knows that the sky hook was his signature shot, right? Everybody knows that. It's the most famous signature shot in basketball, right? But you don't realize until you go back and watch a full game how often he takes that shot in a game. Because if he takes, 20 field goal attempts, for this year, he took 16.9 field goal attempts in a game. Honestly, probably 9 of them were skyhooks. And probably all 9 went in.
yeah,
Right? And
it's so unfair.
it's crazy the depth that he would take that shot from. He'd be like 15 feet away from the basket, just like skyhook, and it just fall. He's not looking at the basket. There's a guy glued to him defensively. It looks like the weirdest just toss-up prayer on the face of the planet when he throws it up and it goes down every single time.
Yeah, that shot is just insane. It's great to watch too. At the same time, like, and I don't feel bad for any defensive man that gets caught with the shy hook. I mean, like, you tried your best, and it's you can't defend it. It's literally like the way he designed it. It's almost like it's pretty much unguardable unless you're like caught him off guard from the other side, right? If you double team him,
I
but
mean, we're talking about a guy who's 7'2", releasing the ball at the full length of his arm above his head, while
yeah,
using his leg to push over to the side to make room for that shot, so you can't really get close enough to it to bother him anyway, right? And he uses like his whole left side of his body to block it out, and doesn't
yeah.
like he's at the point now in 1980, like I said before, where he just doesn't even look at the rim before he does it, right? He just gets the ball there and just goes whoop, tosses it up and it falls. Like he just knows instinctively where the rim is.
Yeah, that's just years and years of basketball. You can't really teach that. That's just pretty much his veteranness showing off in the league. Just going, oh, okay, this is where this net is. Especially playing with the Lakers for so long, especially home games. He's like, okay, boop, boom, done.
The funny thing
Easy
too is
points.
this 79-80 season is arguably the worst season of his career to that point, right? And he takes home MVP.
Yeah.
Right? Like he averaged 24.8, 10.8, 24.8 points, 10.8 rebounds, 4.5 assists, and 3.4 blocks and a steal per game. Shot 60% from the field. The only year you could really argue as possibly being worse would be the year before when he was at 23.8, but he had 12.8 rebounds, some more rebounds, 5.5 assists, some more assists, 4 blocks, some more blocks, right? So the guy was so good that in a season that you could contest as the worst he had had in a decade, he is the best player in the league.
That's. I wish I could just do that. Just be like, hey, this is probably my worst season. His worst season is better than a lot of players' career years, which is insane to think about, right? Like that's just tones to like how good and dominant Kareem has been, and what a great career as well. He's pretty much hasn't missed like he's never injured for like a full year. He's pretty much played every year and missed a couple of games, but I mean the only year where he played less than 70 games was pretty much the 77-78 season where he only played 62, but other than that, it's just pretty much full seasons or at least more than 70, right? So
Yeah, he was dominant for sure.
yeah,
Of course, on the flip side, we had quickly run down first the Lakers obviously get into the playoffs, 16-22, first in the Pacific Division. They destroy the Suns in the first round. It's not close at all. 4-1. They go on to play the Supersonics, who were mired in a bit of an issue with their star players, and that like they had won the championship the year before, right? But there was questions about whether or not they were going to bring the star backcourt that really got them that championship of Gus Williams and Dennis Johnson, and we would see it come to a head the next season, of course, but it had started this season, late in the season, so there's a bit of a disconnect on that Supersonics team, and they end up taking them down 4-1 as well. Which is probably the most impressive thing of this whole run, because that Supersonics team was a stacked team. Like that was a
yeah,
very, very good team, and if you were to look at all of the teams in the league that season on paper, you would probably say the Supersonics had the best roster.
yeah.
And they were
It's
coming off a championship.
yeah. So they already have the confidence of winning, and usually confidence of winning one gives you another confidence to win more. And as long as your players are still playing and everyone not too many major injuries, you should be good to go. But obviously, if there's turmoil in the team, it really kind of
Chemistry really is a big deal.
yeah, it's like for example, I was a huge Celtics fan, and I saw how far they went without Kyrie Irving the previous year when he got injured, and I'm like, oh, this is easy. We're going to the finals this year, and then obviously that didn't happen because of the chemistry and
Yeah.
the inner turmoil between the players. So that can really be detrimental to the team. So no matter how good you are, if that chemistry isn't clicking, you're not winning.
Exactly. And they do, of course, sweeping those rounds, get into the finals against the Sixers, who had a little bit more of a difficult path, only in that they had to play a wild card game in the first round. Well, what was called first round then is essentially a wild card game now, right? So they had to play an extra 2-game series before they got into the quote unquote real playoffs. But it was 2 games against the Washington Bullets. They beat them pretty handily, 2-0. Go on to take on the Hawks, beat them pretty handily, 4-1. Face Larry Bird's Celtics the next round in the Eastern Conference Finals, take them down 4-1. So the route to the finals for the Sixers is 10-2. They win 10 games, they lose 2 on their way to the finals. Looking like maybe it's finally their year that they put it together. You know, they had Julius Erving ever since the NBA and the ABA merged together. Everyone knows the legacy of Julius Erving in the ABA. Comes over to the NBA. They struggle a little bit building teams around him. Not a ton. I mean, he did have some pretty decent teams built around him. They did go to the finals the first year after the merger. But Irving himself never really figured out how to put together the team game as much until the next couple seasons. And then you come to this season and, you know, they pick up Daryl Dawkins, who is a beast inside, right? One of the better defensive big men in the league. 23 years old, averages 14.7 points, 8.7 rebounds, and 1.8 blocks per game. Doug Collins is still there. Lionel Hollins is still there. They pick up Maurice Cheeks, who is 23 years old, 11.4 points, 7 assists rather per game, 2.5 steals per game. So a couple big pieces that they add there that would go on to really be foundations for the Sixers franchise. I mean, Maurice Cheeks and Daryl Dawkins are 2 of the best players ever to play for the Sixers, right? Like Maurice Cheeks is probably right after, you know, Julius Erving and Dawkins. You know, there's very, you know, Iverson, obviously. There's a few guys that you put up there, but really, these are 3 of the top 8 players in the franchise's history that you've assembled on this team. So everything really kind of came together well for them here. Caldwell Jones still there as well, applying that defensive pressure on the interior. So a very good team all around, obviously centered around Dr. J, who was averaging 27 points per game, who to that point was his NBA career high. He obviously, when he was in the ABA, averaged some ridiculous numbers and was in the 30s a few times. You know, when he was younger and a little bit more of a self-centered kind of player, I guess, selfish kind of player, where he was a bit more of a scorer. Became a little bit more of a scorer and facilitator a little bit later on in his career when he, by his own admission, figured that, you know, out that was the way to win. But puts it all together this year, 26.9 points per game, which would end up actually being his overall NBA career high, like in a single season. So arguably his best year in the NBA, and they needed it, of course, to get to the finals here against the Lakers, but the Lakers just end up being too much for them to take on. An interesting note on Philly making it there is that 4 professional sports teams from Philadelphia made their respective championships in the 1980 season. The Sixers.
That's crazy.
The Sixers in the NBA, the Flyers in the NHL, the Phillies in the MLB, and the Eagles, who lost in the Super Bowl.
Oh, well, we know the Eagles were probably going to lose because they didn't win their first championship till 30 years later. So, about 30 years later? 20-something. It's around that time.
Only the Phillies actually won.
Wow.
The rest of them all lost.
Oh, those poor Philly franchises.
A stacked Philadelphia team, by the way. The Philadelphia Phillies that year. My God. Possibly one of the best baseball teams ever assembled. But moving on.
Yeah.
That, just a quick note there.
Yeah.
That's
fun.
Very interesting that they were able to do that. I think a little bit later on, didn't Boston do that in like 07? It was the Celtics, the Patriots, the Bruins, and the Red Sox. I think they did in '07, didn't they?
I don't.
Off the top of my head. Or made championships, not necessarily won. Although the Patriots obviously lost.
Yeah, let's not talk about that.
The
That's
Celtics
a dark
won.
day.
The Red Sox won. And
think
I'm
the
not
Bruins
enough of a
won.
hockey fan to know whether or not the Bruins won.
I think, was it the Bruins versus Vancouver?
It's
So if
possible.
it wasn't, the Bruins won because the Vancouver had the Vancouver riots. So
There we go.
uh
So it has happened since. But much
go
later,
Boston.
we're one city kind of did that. I'm trying to think if I can think of any other. I don't know about Detroit in like '04 maybe. But I
Actually,
don't, because the
maybe.
Red Wings, the Tigers, and the Pistons are all good, but
The Lions probably not. The Lions definitely didn't know. 04 was Patriots Eagles or Patriots Carolina, I forget. I think it's Patriots Eagles. In 04. Yeah, Patriots Eagles.
okay. Yeah, so close, but no cigar.
Yeah.
But yeah,
The Lions have been terrible
so
forever.
it's happened a couple of times, but only a handful in the history of major sports. So a pretty significant achievement there. In the actual series, though, the Lakers do end up winning 4-2. It's a bit of an up and down series at the beginning.
Yeah.
The Sixers do win game 2, right? The Lakers take game 1, Sixers take game 2, Lakers take game 3, Sixers take game 4, Lakers take game 5 and 6 and end up winning the series. But of course, the big thing in this series is game 6. It goes down as one of the biggest games in the history of the NBA because it is arguably Magic Johnson's best career game. Game 6, of course, Magic Johnson drops 42 points with Kareem injured. Kareem misses the game in hopes that he can play for game 7. Don't need him. Magic Johnson starts at center, despite playing point guard all of the rest of the year, and actually is the only player ever to play all 5 positions in an NBA Finals game, because in that game 6 he played point guard, shooting guard, small forward, power forward, and center.
See? 2K cheat code. Plays every single position. Yeah, it's this game was the one I was most excited to watch because you just hear all the I've never watched it live before. You hear all the pretty much you hear the story like, oh, Magic Johnson went in at center for Kareem. This is crazy. It's amazing. And then voila, you see, it was just wow. It was a thrill to watch. I'd never seen Magic look so good. And this is his rookie year. Not to say he had a terrible year or anything. Like, obviously he didn't have a terrible career, but it's just it was interesting to watch. And it's kind of maybe he could have been a scorer, but he was more of like being a facilitator more. Because I feel like that game where he scored 39 points.
I watched an interview with Jason Williams earlier this week, he's in the conversation for my favorite NBA player of all time. But I watched an interview with Jason Williams, and he was talking about the difference between being a good passer and being a willing passer, right? And he was saying there's a lot of good passers in the NBA, right? But if you have a score-first mentality, it's not as effective as being a willing passer who, he was saying, yeah, I have this shot, but I have, Kyle Korver open in the corner for a 3. He's a better shooter than me. I'm going to make the extra pass, right? And Magic Johnson was that guy who was like, yeah, I could make this shot, but, Kareem has the most effective shot in the history of the NBA, and he's standing on the block against a guy who's, 4 inches shorter than him, so I'm going to give the ball to him, right?
No, that makes total sense, right? Which kind of gives you a big old what if. But yeah, some players, the selflessness makes you more of a champion. You know, a lot of players, not every player has that mentality. And I know people knock LeBron for it all the time, but that's what makes it. That's one of his strengths, I feel, as a player, right? And the Magic kind of was kind of not the first example, but one of the examples of that. And I'm pretty sure Magic was probably one of the influences for LeBron, you know, at
Oh, for
least.
sure. Magic is probably the biggest influence for LeBron.
Yeah,
Aside,
for sure.
aside from maybe Jordan, but I mean, his game is very much more similar to Magic Johnson's than it is to Michael Jordan's. But I'm sure if you
Yeah,
asked LeBron, he'd probably say Jordan.
yeah.
Um,
Even we learned from Jordan too, right? He's like, oh, I learned in one of the finals game that I had to pass the ball. Like every player has to learn that you're not the only guy. You know, there's
you
teammates.
have to learn to trust your teammates. Exactly.
Yeah.
Um, Winding it back a little bit, game one, of course, the first game of the series. Now, every single game on this series that was outside, it was the first time, actually, and it's going to sound weird that I'm saying this, but this is a good thing, not a bad thing. Just, I'm going to preface it with that. This is the first time ever that every single NBA Finals game was aired on a tape delay on national television. So, locally, you could watch it live, but the rest of the country, the rest of the United States, you had to watch it on tape delay, which means it aired later. So the game was filmed and recorded, and then they aired it after the game. Now that sounds like what? What? You couldn't watch it live? But for the time, that was a pretty big deal because most of the time before, there was games during the NBA Finals that if you weren't local, you couldn't even watch the game. Right? Anywhere.
Yeah.
You had to watch highlights the next day or the next morning or something, right? So, it was a big deal that this was the first time that actually happened, and probably has something to do with the league explosion afterwards as well that would obviously proceed in the mid 80s. But that game one was kind of Kareem's, uh, I don't want to say best game of the series because he was very dominant in game two, but he came out on fire with a passion in game one. You could tell he was kind of on a mission to win a championship. Like he was tired of not being a champion. It'd been a while since he'd won a championship, right? So he was kind of tired of being the best player in the league and not winning a championship. Game one drops 33 points, grabs 14 rebounds, 6 blocks, 5 assists. They end up winning 109-102 at home, of course. Jamal Wilkes was also very good in the team, very good in the game. He dropped 20 points, but he did a very good job defending Julius Erving and holding him to only 20 points as well.
Yeah, and I think in the first half, Kareem had something like 19 points already. Like he was just, I was just like, oh my goodness. I think at first, like it was just him scoring at the first, like 4 buckets. He was just, yeah, he came out guns blazing. He's like, I want a championship, and by God, I'm gonna get it.
Of course, Magic Johnson also has his finals debut with a triple-double. No big deal. 16 points, 10 assists, 11 rebounds. It's fine.
He's like, yeah, here we go. I'm the triple-double king.
And then we go on to game two, which the Lakers actually dropped to the Sixers. The Lakers, of course, at home. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar dominated again, though. He put up 38 points this time, and arguably a better game than he had the first time. But Julius Erving was the one who came out of the gates on fire this time. Dropped 12 points in the first quarter, ended up with 23 in the game. Had a big dunk over Kareem Abdul-Jabbar at the beginning that pissed off Kareem, and they
I remember
a little argumentative at the beginning there. But the Sixers go on to hold on to it. Still a tight game, though. 107-104, the final. Only a 3-point game. And, of course, as we mentioned, the first year of the 3-point shot. So, 3-point game having a little bit more significance than it had in years past. At one point, the Sixers actually led the game by 20 in the fourth quarter. The Lakers came back close. It was 105-104 at one point. at near the end of the fourth there. So they almost gave it up.
Yeah, these games were pretty. The first two games for sure were pretty close. It was kind of like I know the game one was kind of back and forth a little bit, and even game two, Lakers I believe they started out in the lead as well, but then that kind of stopped a little bit. Cause I didn't, and it's what's fun for me is I never look at who wins what game. I kind of just let it ride out to get a little bit of surprise. So I thought the Lakers were going to win game two. Come to my surprise, Philly the doctor's like, no, let me just put the team on my back.
They had all the momentum going for them there in the fourth quarter. I mean,
yeah,
a 20-point lead for the Sixers, and then the Lakers were like, no, we're the Lakers.
Let's erase that.
Yeah, we're good. We're the Lakers. And of course, well, we know how it finishes. 76ers end up pulling out their first win of the series. We go back to Philly for the first time in Game 3 for the series. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar drops 33 again, 14 rebounds again. It's like 33 and 14 is just that's his numbers for this series. He's dropping 33 and 14. But he comes out and dominates again and wins them that game. Of note, though, in Game 3 is that Julius Erving scored the only three-pointer of the entire series in this game. And it was the first in NBA Finals history. So, there you go. Dr. J, the very first three-pointer in the history of the NBA Finals.
And the only one. But it's crazy.
Of
fact
that
there's
series,
only one in the entire series. Nowadays, you have way more than that in the first 5 minutes.
Nowadays, Curry hits 10 in a game, so.
Yeah, right. So, that's insane. But yeah, people obviously it first got introduced, and obviously it's a harder shot, and most guys have been learning how to shoot from the post, so it's gonna be hard to learn how to take shots for the 3-point, right? So
it took some adapting for most players.
Yeah, it's not gonna be a right away thing, but it's crazy that teams didn't really kind of take advantage, because obviously if you keep scoring 3 points and the team keeps scoring 2, you're always going to be ahead, right? So
that's why nobody takes mid-range jump shots anymore, except DeMar DeRozan.
Pretty much. I think that's why he hasn't won yet. But yeah, it's crazy.
How do you have two players that score 20 plus points and are all-stars but finish under 500? By having both of those players be mid-range jump shooters with DeMar DeRozan and LaMarcus Aldridge.
It's insane.
But Game 4 is very interesting, actually, because a lot of people don't know this, but when you think of Dr. J, what's the first highlight that comes to mind?
I'm the worst person to ask this.
Because for most people, it's when he drives baseline, goes up underneath the backboard from behind it, hangs in the air for an amount of time that just seems inhuman, and then reverse dunks the ball from behind the backboard. Which that highlight was actually Game 4 of this series. Which is probably goes down as Dr. J's best play in his career, or the one at least that's shown on the most highlight reels. Interesting of note, though, because I mentioned the tape delay and the not airing games and that beforehand, is that when he does it, you hear Brent Musburger later says that Julius Erving, who Brent Musburger also called ABA games when the ABA was around, Brent Musburger says that Julius Erving made moves like that routinely in his ABA days, but the ABA had no national TV contract, so nobody saw it.
Wow. That's great. That's crazy. And obviously he's seen it, right? So that just goes to the skill. Plus he's still in the prime of his career, right? He's 29, so like that.
29, yeah, he's coming up to the tail end of his athletic
Hmm.
prime, right? But he's,
Yeah.
he's added the awareness and he's added the
Mhm.
experience in that, right? So his
Yeah.
overall prime as a basketball player, probably right around that time.
Yeah. The basketball IQ prime. What am I saying? His basketball IQ is probably a lot more higher than as well. But yeah, that's just that dunk was yeah, that's probably one of the best dunks.
It it
Which is
is arguably the best in-game dunk in basketball history, right? Like
yeah.
there's a few that you could throw in there. You know, at okay. It's a contender for the second best in-game dunk in basketball history because the best in-game dunk in basketball history is Vince Carter at the Olympics when he jumped over a 7-footer on France and dunked the ball. That like ESPN isn't even allowed to show the highlight of. They have to show a picture of it because they don't have the rights
Wow.
to show the video. But yeah, that's got to be number one of all time. But this move by Dr. J in game, it's got to be up there. It's a contender. Sean Kemp had some big ones in that too. Can't forget that. People forget about some of Sean Kemp's amazing plays because obviously he was a big name guy, but he wasn't Dr. J. But yeah, so an interesting note. The Sixers do go on to win that game, 105-102. Dr. J drops 23. Daryl Dawkins actually leads the Sixers in scoring with 26. Magic Johnson, for the first time in his career, leads his finals team in scoring in a final series with 28 points in that one. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar fails to get at least 33 for the first time in the series. And the only time that he would actually play in a game in the series and fail to get at least 33 points. So Magic kind of has to carry the team a little bit more on that front, which is why you can understand that people were a little bit concerned going into Game 6 without Kareem because obviously the Sixers won Game 4 where Magic was relied on as the number one guy for a lot of it because Kareem just wasn't his usual self.
Yeah, and but that goes to go game. Cream probably had. I have a question for you.
Mm-hmm.
Going to game 5. He scored 40 points. Would you have given Kareem the Finals MVP, or is it because of games he didn't play in every single game? So
I think if
because
Kareem played in Game 6, I don't think it would have even mattered what he did in that game. He would have won Finals MVP. But because of Magic Johnson's heroic effort without Kareem in the lineup, like we said before, it's the storyline, it's the narrative, right? The
yeah,
narrative of what Magic Johnson did in that game, the historic game to wrap up the championship, um, took home, got him the MVP. But if Kareem was in that game, the narrative changes, right?
yeah.
Even if Kareem's in that game and Magic starts at point guard like he does all year round, even if he still drops 42 points, you kind of still got to give it to Kareem, right? If Kareem is anywhere near Kareem, right? Like if he's anywhere near Kareem levels, if he drops 20 points, 10 rebounds, you give Kareem the Finals MVP, right? But it's the storyline of doing it without the best player in the league in your lineup.
Fair enough. That's the thing because I was just looking at Kareem's numbers and obviously we don't have like you said, context means everything, right? So I'm like, man, Kareem's numbers are really good. It's weird that he didn't get MVP because usually nowadays I don't think they give that to the MVP to
I
it's pretty
mean,
much whoever scores the most now
look at when
in today's NBA.
look at when Kawhi won MVP, right? With the Spurs when he won Finals MVP, right? He wasn't the leading scorer on his team. He won Finals MVP because he played a really good defense on LeBron, right? So there's a storyline aspect that goes into it for sure, and I think it goes into Finals MVP a lot more than it goes into season MVP, obviously because the season is much longer, right? Finals MVP, everything is within recent memory, and what have you done for me lately becomes much more significant. Plus, you got to think each game that you go on in an NBA Finals series is more important than the last, right? Whether you
Yeah.
win the game or lose the game, the next game is more important than the game before, right? So you got to factor that in too. That Game 6, they won the series when they weren't expected to win Game 6, right? Like, Game 6 was in Philadelphia without Kareem. The idea was, let's get through this game, rest Kareem, so that Kareem can play in Game 7. But because of Magic Johnson's efforts in the game, didn't need a Game 7.
And that's how he got the MVP. Fair enough. That would, honestly, I don't even know why I question that now that I think about it. Because that effort is pretty freaking impressive.
To support your point, though, up to Game 5, so up to the end of Game 5, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was averaging 33.4 points per game in the series. Magic Johnson was averaging 17.4. Magic Johnson was also averaging over 10 assists per game, but you got what I'm going with there, because Kareem was also averaging more than 10 rebounds per game too. So
Yeah.
they were I probably would have gone to Kareem up to that point, especially when you factor in that Kareem got hurt earlier in Game 5 and he came back, right? So he came back in the fourth quarter on that injured bad ankle and scored 14 points.
Yeah, so
that
he's a
Game
champ.
5 was a heroic effort by Kareem as well, right? We think of Willis Reed coming back into the game on the Knicks as this huge thing. We think of Paul Pierce coming back in on that Celtics team as this huge thing. We think of, all of these instances throughout sports history where the star player goes out and comes back in and everyone's, throws this acclaim on them. But I think because it's Kareem and we're just so used to him being so consistently good and never being hurt and all that, we forget about just how heroic this is to come back and play on an injury that would keep you out 2 days later, right? It would be too bad for you to be able to play 2 days later, and you come back in the fourth and drop 14 points.
It's pretty much Kareem, right? He just goes in and gets it. You kind of get I guess they get spoiled, That's I can't find a better word for it, but we've gotten spoiled with Kareem's play. He's just some players, they're expected to earn you those 30 plus points, and when they don't, everyone just thinks there's something wrong or he must have a terrible day. You're right. It's pretty much just expect Kareem to do Kareem things, and he does it, and then we just kind of overlook it, take it for granted, too, pretty much.
Exactly. And then, of course, that's Game 5. The Lakers take Game 5, push the series to 3-2. We now know Kareem's not going to play in Game 6. Most people had the Sixers winning at home in Game 6. And then, of course, the game we've already talked about in depth. Magic Johnson comes in and just destroys it. At the half, though, this game was actually tied. 60 points apiece at the half. The second half, though, the Lakers just pull away. They dominate, right, in the second half. We talk about Magic Johnson scoring 42, but Jamal Wilkes also dropped 37 and 10 rebounds
Jeez.
in that game, right? So it was a team effort overall, right? The fact that Kareem wasn't there put a lot more on the shoulders of Magic, but he had the support. I think it was a couple years ago, I want to say like the early 2010s, that Magic was asked about that game, and he said that, honestly, Jamal Wilkes was just as important in that game as I was.
It's good. See? Yeah, classic Magic. He's always doesn't like to take the full credit of everything. He's always like, "Oh no, my teammates were the reason." So, and honestly, he's right though. He's not wrong. I mean, 37 points isn't nothing to laugh at, right? It's shame on Philly. They let two players score over 35 points on defense, but they just came out guns blazing. So it's hard to, when a team just gets hot and they're just rising, and you have two players with the hot hands, it's just so hard to guard, right? You're like, okay, we got Magic, we just double team. But if we double team and Jamal Wilkes is open, and that's a disaster waiting to happen. So it's so hard to guard two players that are hot unless you yourself have some all defensive teams on your roster.
One of my favorite things about this game was at the end of the game when Dr. J is going off the court and one of the media members asked him a question about Magic Johnson's performance, and the mics are so bad you can't actually hear the full question that he was asked. You can make out that it's about Magic Johnson, but it's like the rest of the thing is like staticky. Maybe if you turn on subtitles or something. But you can hear Dr. J's response, which is, "It was amazing. It is just amazing." And that's it. He walks away.
Yeah, he's a little bit salty, at the same time. When I lose, I don't want to talk to anybody. If I freaking lose a video game, I don't want to talk to people when I lose, right? But yeah, it's crazy to think that play, and I guess that was the passing of the torch, because after that,
I mean, Dr. J did win a championship a little bit later, so that's like that did happen. Dr. J was still great, don't get me wrong, but it wasn't necessarily the passing of the torch in that of being necessarily the best player in the league yet at the time, because I feel like even when Dr. J came into the NBA, Kareem was still the best player in the NBA, but Dr. J was the biggest draw, right? Like
yeah,
when LeBron came into the NBA at first, Shaq was still the best player in the NBA, but LeBron instantly became the biggest draw, right? And that's what same deal with Dr. J, right? And he, yeah, you got to think that this is kind of the passing of the torch from Dr. J being the biggest draw to the Showtime Lakers being the biggest draw.
yeah, no, for sure. That's kind of what I meant. They were, Dr. J was pretty much the biggest draw. People wanted to see how he played and everything like that. But then now you're like, oh, did you hear about this like Magic Johnson kid? He came in and played center in front of Kareem. It's crazy. Oh my goodness. And then
it's funny with today's positionless basketball how we look back at that and we're like, so? But then you think about it and it's like, nobody was doing that then, right? There was no point guard in the league that you could just throw in at center, right? Other than Magic Johnson.
Yeah, no, for sure, right? It's that's why everyone thought it was very revolutionary at the time, but now it's like a lot of the players in today's league can guard every position. They can play point guard, they can play shooting guard, they can play small forward. Yeah, a lot of players are asked to play way more positions than just the one. Back then, you're kind of assigned your one position. If you're tall, you're a center, and you got to learn how to do the post and post up on people. Nowadays,
it was run kind of like a high school basketball team is run.
yeah, pretty much. That's what ultimate high school basketball team.
Right, where you find a tall guy and you're like, we're good. I coached middle school basketball for a little while at the middle school, not middle school, but the elementary school that we both attended. I attended middle school there. But I went back there and coached for my volunteer hours, and that was basically my strategy as a coach was, hey, this guy's pretty tall. I'll just give him the ball every time.
Yeah, I don't blame you.
But that was basketball back then, right? It was run through the bigs, right? It was run through the tall guys. Now it's a little bit different. Everyone's so much more athletic now. Everyone's stronger now. Everyone's faster. And, of course, we have the influence of Magic Johnson and Larry Bird on the game itself to have players kind of fit those roles a little more.
Yeah, for sure. It's now it's a guards league, but yeah, it's Larry Bird and Magic Johnson really contributed to the birth of what the current NBA is. Obviously, there's not a lot of players in the league that kind of had the draw that they did. I guess the next era is Michael Jordan. Actually, I guess like it is. We just had a whole freaking documentary about it. But it's insane to see just kind of how it all really began and how this was actually struggling in the 70s with both the ABA and the NBA, and now it's starting to become the league that we know today.
It's a true rags to riches story.
Yeah, for sure, right?
um,
Uh, and I'm happy for it.
oh, for sure. I mean, if there's no Magic and Larry Bird, then there is no NBA the way we know it today, right? Like the NBA could very well be lower than the NHL today if we never have Magic and Bird.
Yeah, for sure. It's sorry for NHL fans, but uh, that league probably is the least popular.
Someone who was it this week that it was a big deal that they said that Americans didn't care about the NHL. I, I can't remember who it was, but it made headlines and it was all over Twitter on that. But it's like, I mean, he's not wrong. Because the NHL has the lowest ratings among almost any big sport in the States, right? Like, tops is obviously football, right? Basketball and baseball come second and third, right? And then you have college
Is
sports,
MLS?
right? MLS is
Okay,
yeah,
still bad.
but
It's still low. At least it's better than
but
that.
I think there might be some European leagues that also top the NHL in American viewing. But
Wow.
I know both college football and college basketball are both ahead of it as well. I'm pretty sure golf is ahead of it. I'm fairly certain NASCAR is ahead of it. So it's not exactly wrong to say Americans don't care about the NHL. Canadians, now,
Oh, they
now that's a
love it.
different story.
Yeah. hmm Yeah, NHL is more for the Canadians. It's just that our population isn't as high, so
And we're better at
it's not good.
it.
Yeah, and we're better at it too. Yeah, you can kind of tell. I was just looking to like a lot of the salaries in the NHL are like,
Oh, they're paddles
oh man,
compared. And the funny
yeah,
thing too
compared
is
to
with
NBA.
with all the I mean not funny, kind of sad, I guess. With all the COVID stuff going on, is that any of the players that decided to risk it and not sign a contract or whatever in the off season with the NHL and go into this off season, they're gonna have to take such a pay cut now because of the league's losses with COVID, right? It's we talk about the other leagues, but the other leagues are gonna be fine, right? It's not a big deal for the NFL. It's not a big deal for maybe for the MLB because they're acting like complete imbeciles in this whole thing. Not even working. Their most recent pitch was for a 43 game season because they want to play the players less in a prorated payment. It's
Jesus.
I don't think the MLB grasps the fact that their sport is dying.
Yeah, it's behind the times. I think I saw an article. It's one of the top articles in Bleacher Report. It's how it was behind the times and everything like that. So it's just, yeah, it's one of those things where everything's on fire. It's like that meme with the dog. The whole house is on fire, and then she's like, "This is fine. I
Yeah,
feel good."
that
That's
exactly.
pretty much the
Except they're also walking into the fire while they're doing it.
MLB. Pretty much.
Uh, so for the series itself, the final series wraps up. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar leads the series in scoring, averages 33.4 per game, despite missing a game. Also leads it in rebounds with 13.6 per game. Magic Johnson finishes second in rebounds in the series, 11.2 per game there. Averages 8.7 assists, 21.5 points, and leads the series in minutes with 42.7 per game as well. On the Philly side of things, Dr. J leads his team with 25.5 points per game as well. And of course, leads the series in three-point percentage, as he is the only one who actually made a three in the series. He shot 250, so by association, 1 for 4. And that was the only player to make one in the series. So we wrap up that series there with that. The Lakers, their first kind of journey back into the limelight, back into dominance, and into the fun team that would change the way kind of we look at basketball, along with the Celtics in that, in the style of basketball that they would go on to play, which became entirely different in the 80s from basketball beforehand. Basketball in the 80s was almost in no way similar to 70s basketball or 60s basketball for that matter. But the Sixers, though, in a way, in a very minor way, I suppose, kind of get the last laugh because they do make it a little further the next year. The Lakers end up losing in the first round to the Rockets, who would go on to represent the Western Conference in the finals that year. But they would only win one game in the playoffs the following season, where we would have the other team of the 80s, the Celtics, take home their first championship of the decade when they would take on the Houston Rockets. The Sixers, though, would make it back to the Eastern Conference Finals and push the Celtics that year. It was a 7-game series. The Celtics had to win 4-3 to that series to move on to play the Rockets. So the Sixers really did push them as much as they could, right kind of to the brink of things on that end. And, of course, Dr. J would win his MVP in the NBA the next season as well, but would have to wait a little bit longer to finally take home his NBA championship to go along with those ABA ones he won much earlier on in his career. But for now, that is the 1979-1980 NBA season and the first finals of a decade that will be dominated by two teams that we all know very well and that we hear very frequently dominating the league, the Celtics and the Lakers. The two teams with far more championships than any other team in the NBA.
That is true. And, I'd say probably Lakers and Celtics are probably the most recognizable name for a team for the NBA.
The NBA is, Lakers and Celtics, 1 and 2. However you want to put them, those are the two best teams in the history of the NBA. There's not much question to that. Unless you're talking about the amount of money they've earned, in which case it's the Knicks for some fucking reason. I don't understand. Knicks fans, can we have just a sidebar? What are you guys doing? Why are you still going to these games? The Knicks suck. They have been garbage for so long, and the team has done really nothing to earn your fandom, despite how terrible they've been. Yet every year you fork over more money than any other team in the NBA.
Yeah, and also scream sell the team too.
And also, your team is owned by James Dolan. If you want James Dolan gone, force him to sell the team by hitting his wallet. Stop him from making money by stopping going to games, and that's how you get rid of James Dolan.
They're not going to stop.
No, they're not. It's funny because it's the same argument for anyone that argues that athletes make too much money. They make a percentage of the money that their league makes. So, like if the place you were working for made billions of dollars and were paying you minimum wage, you'd be pretty pissed. Right? So we're talking about an organization that grosses billions upon billions of dollars, and yeah, the players are the main reason that they're doing that. So yeah, they're going to make a lot of money, and it's deserved because the league makes a lot of money, and we live in a capitalist society. So if you want athletes to make less money, stop going to games.
Yeah, I never understood that argument when everyone's like, oh, athletes make too much money. Like, these guys are making millions of dollars to shoot a ball in a net. And
if anything, the owners make too much money.
Yeah. I'm like, if you guys are upset with how much the athletes make, wait till you find out what the owners make. It's gonna make, right? And they're like, the owners and most of their teams are pretty much like, they just bought the teams to have fun with. It's not even like their main thing. It's just like, let me just have a team to play around with and have fun. It's like my little project, Like for them, they're playing a Football Manager or my 2K, my GM, but in real life because they're so freaking rich.
And in the case of the Knicks, they're not good at it either.
Yeah, that too.
I'm going to close out by one kind of observation. Actually, you know what? Let's both throw out our biggest observations from the game. I know I'm pulling this out of the blue on you, so I'm going to go first and give you some time to think. Um, Mine is watching these old games. The biggest thing that we take for granted today, I think, is how often the announcers get things right. Because when you go back and watch these, there will be a call, a whistle on the play, and you'll hear the announcers talking about it, and they're just completely wrong. And there was a few times in this game, or not, I shouldn't say in this series, but really it happened more often than not throughout Game 6, but it was one of the announcers would say, oh, that's going to be this or whatever, and then like immediately the other announcer's like, yeah, that's, no. Like they'd be like, that's going to be a charge, and then the other announcer's like, yeah, there's no charge.
Yeah, that's hilarious that you say that. I've noticed that too. You know, some players have a thing, and then I guess one thing I kind of notice is the announcers have a lot of bias as well, a little bit more
They
than in
took
the.
they took some more liberties than they do today, that's for sure.
Yeah, right. It's which is fine. It's more entertaining to me when you hear someone with actual bias, you know, because you're kind of like it goes like, oh, they're rooting for this team or they're rooting against this team, you know. It's a lot more interesting in my opinion instead of the whole sugar coated and just kind of be more subtle about loving your favorite team, you know. But yeah, I guess that's kind of the thing that I've kind of noticed. And other thing that I find that we take for granted a lot is this one's kind of obvious, but just like the quality of the video. In
That's
my
true.
opinion,
It's
just
funny too because if we go back and watch a sporting event from the 90s, it's almost unwatchable just based on how bad the
yeah.
video quality is. But back then we'd watch that and we were like, this is great quality,
I
right?
know, like they look like a real person. You know, I hate to be those graphic nerds kids, but like it does come a long way.
It's true. It's like when we were kids and we'd play like NBA 2K and that, and you'd have your parents or relatives would come down and look at it and be like, "Is this a real game? It looks so real." And we look at like NBA 2K4 now, and it's like they don't even look anything near what the players looked like. But our obviously opinions and our views on that are the place that we're viewing that from changes as time goes on, right?
Yeah, and then your eyes just kind of adjust and you get used to it. It's crazy. And nowadays, like the TVs look like the way they colored and the shading and everything. It looks better than actual real life now.
Oh yeah,
Um,
for sure.
I'm
Plus,
like,
you can see the whole court at all times, right?
right? Yeah, it's insane. And oh, that's another thing. The cameraman sometimes is slow to catch like fast paced games.
They
Have you
had
noticed like
they had less cameras, right? Is the thing because you watch the seamless transitions in not just basketball but all sporting events today. Aside from that one Monday Night Football game last year when they only had the overhead camera and everyone ripped them apart on Twitter because the other camera broke, so they only had the overhead camera. Uh, but nowadays we have, these seamless transitions between the 16 different cameras we have on the sidelines and throughout the arena and on top of the backboard and on the jumbotron and all of that stuff. But back then there were like two camera guys, right? And you would notice because it actually got a little better this season, but more so the season before, the camera would be fixed looking at one end of the court, and then when they'd bring the ball up to the other end of the court, it just switched to another camera looking fixed on that end of the court.
that's insane. It's always it's always funny, you know. But like at the time, you know, obviously because they're not making enough money, we can't expect them to have five cameras and paying four different
Technology
cameramen
too, right?
and
You
the
got to think
technology too.
back in the day, they're lugging around like 50-pound cameras, right, to do this. Whereas today, it's, I can get a significantly better quality on my, ounce smartphone.
That's true. My phone takes better videos. So yeah, back then I don't even think CDs weren't around at the time. It
Oh
was the
no,
'80s,
it was
so it's like
VHS tapes.
Betamax. Was it
Well, yeah,
Betamax?
true,
Not even
true. It depends.
VHS yet.
It depends because I think late. I want to say late '80s VHS came in because by the end of the '90s it was CDs. VHS didn't have a long period on top. It there was another.
Well,
Oh,
DVDs didn't last that long either, right? Blu-ray comes in after. Well, there's still
but it
DVDs,
was kind
but
of similar technology, right?
yeah.
Whereas VHS, it was VHS for a little bit. They just went completely different when they switched over to CDs, right? But I want to. I might be wrong because I was born in 1992, but I want to say there was a short period between VHS and CDs where there was something else that was there or something that everyone thought was going to catch on and then just didn't. And it had like a 1 or 2 year era and it was gone.
I'm trying to think. I can't. Yeah, I can't. I can't remember. I thought it was.
Kind of like
I know
the
cassettes.
kind of like the MP3 player before the iPod just destroyed it.
Wow, the MP3. I remember that. I had an MP3
Zune.
player.
Where it was
Yeah.
like 2 years of Zune, and then all of a sudden it was just or MySpace
Or
to
the iPod
Facebook.
Touch. The iPod Touch to the iPhone.
Yeah.
Why get an iPod Touch when you can just get an
Well,
iPhone?
but there was iPods had a stretch though before the
Yeah.
iPhones, where there were so many different versions of iPods, and you weren't
The
cool unless you
Nanos.
got the newest version of the iPod, and it was that weird period of time where all of a sudden bigger was better, right? Like it was smaller was better for so long, and then for a little stretch of time, bigger was better, and then we were back to smaller was better. But yeah, it was technology, man, technology, and we'll be talking a lot probably about the evolution of technology through the '80s because the '80s through to the '90s is probably one of the biggest just booms in technology that we've seen. So we'll view a lot of that as we talk about the Celtics and the Lakers over the next few weeks a lot. But for now,
It also helps to the development of the league as well, the technology. The development of the league, yeah, the technology probably really helped a lot for it too. So
get better quality programming, right? It's a better product that you're
yeah.
putting out there, so obviously people are going to want to watch it more, right?
Oh, one more thing. Sorry, I know you want to close up, but one more thing that I really did notice is the scoreboard. There's no scoreboard while you're watching.
Yeah, so that
It's like
didn't
never...
actually become a thing in sporting events until the '90s. And when they did make it a thing where the scoreboard was always on the screen, I think it was the NFL that did it first. But and they only did it for like one season at first because everybody complained about it. Everybody hated the fact that they had the score on the screen all the time. And so they got rid of it, and then they brought it back, and then eventually, at some point in the '90s, we adapted to always having the scoreboard on the screen. But yeah, it is a little bit when you're kind of multitasking or something, and you look back up, it's like, what the hell was the score?
Yeah, right. So that's the one thing that I felt like I took for granted. I'm like, when does the scoreboard get introduced? I can't wait.
For sure. All right. So that, without us distracting ourselves more and making this even longer, that was the 1979-1980 championship Los Angeles Lakers. Next time around, we will join you again, and we will discuss the 1980-1981 Boston Celtics, and, of course, Mr. Larry Bird taking home his first NBA championship. But until then, we will see you next time on the Pure Point Project. My name is Jeff Blagden.
I'm Xavier Barnett. Sorry.
And this has been the NBA in Hindsight.